Welcome to the podcast. My name is Dave, and we are glad that you have joined us. This is my friend Nate. Nate, introduce yourself.
Hey, Dave. My name is Nate, and I've been a pastor here since 2002. I love Utah. Moved my family out to Utah, raised my kids here in Utah. And one of the most incredible things about Utah is its people. And
Yes.
Beyond the beauty of the mountains, it's the people here. We love it. We love the people here. From the very beginning of living here in Utah, some of my greatest friends to this day are incredible LDS people. As a pastor, I've been just engaged in lots of conversations with people who have left the LDS church, and they're struggling to find faith. And one of the reasons I came out here was to share the truth about who Jesus is, the gospel. Today we have our guest, Carl Wimmer, and he's got an incredible story about encountering Jesus and experiencing God's grace and love in a pretty miraculous way. And so we're excited about people's stories, Dave. I mean, it's as simple as that.
It's amazing.
The stories of encountering Jesus and experiencing his love and his grace. And so that's why we do what we do, and that's why we started this podcast, because every story matters. Every life matters.
Yeah. So we're excited. We're excited to have Carl on this podcast as well. And so, Carl, introduce yourself, and we're going to get into your story here in just a moment.
Well, I'm the only non-outsider. You know, I you guys moved into Utah.
Yep.
I've never been outside of Utah as far as living. I was born and raised in Utah. Lived here my entire life. Born and raised in the LDS Church, embraced it, loved it, lived it for many, many years, and now I'm an evangelical Christian pastor. And so, you know, we ended up in the same place, but we certainly had different background, a different history that led us to the same place, which is at the foot of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So, you know, Carl, we're talking about just the beginning of everybody's story straight away, and your story. I mean, we've talked about it before, but with our audience joining us today, your story is one that you've categorized as filled with arrogance, and I think that's an incredible admission to straight away go, yeah, my issue in coming and encountering Jesus is an issue of arrogance. Do you want to explain that to our audience?
I think it all comes down to a conversation I had. It's been many, many years ago now, but I remember a conversation I was having at a political event, because we'll get into this later, but I have a political background. And I still remember this conversation where I was talking to people and I told them that I am successful at everything I do. There is nothing that I have not accomplished that I've wanted to accomplish.
Yeah.
And I took tremendous amount of pride in my self glory and success. I mean, as much as anybody else, I was able to put on a self-deprecating show, and feign humility.
Okay.
But the truth is, I was a very arrogant person for a very, very long time, and it took an act of God humbling me to bring me to my knees, where everything else fell away but the truth that is found in Jesus.
Could you talk about some of the things that led to what you call this arrogance?
Yeah.
Like, you were having success in a lot of things.
So I mean, some of them are just silly, but the fact is, I'm kind of a goal obsessed person. Mm-hmm. I knew that I wanted to be a police officer and a SWAT guy from the time I was in kindergarten on. I had a little journal. I still have it to this day, a little journal in kindergarten that said, when I grow up, I want to be a SWAT guy, a police officer. And as soon as I had the opportunity to become a police officer, I did. And as soon as I had an opportunity to help form a SWAT team and become a SWAT commander, I did. And it's just that mindset of being goal-oriented and accomplishing my goals.
Which is incredible. Do you have a journal from kindergarten talking about the goals you want to accomplish?
No, I
Like,
do
I
not.
don't have-
Yeah,
that's
I don't. That seems like something an
That's like
overachiever would do.
type AAA. Like, you don't get more type A than that at kindergarten. And you still have the journal in your
have the
possession.
journal.
That's crazy.
And it's just who I am. I am very focused on things that I want
Sure.
to do, and I as a young man, the one thing I will say is I was never a good student in high school. And as a result, I actually was not able to play high school sports. I didn't get the grades to play high school sports. And so instead, I started boxing with an inner city boxing club in Salt Lake City.
Interesting.
And I was pretty good. I was really fairly decent, to be honest, as an amateur. And I had certain things that made it easier. I had natural punching power, and that's kind of the great equalizer in the sport of boxing. And so one of the goals I did not accomplish that I set for myself, and I guess it's one of the great failures of my youth, is I wanted to go to the Olympics. I really wanted to go to the Olympics, and I worked very hard. I remember, I specifically remember one particular summer, one year where I dedicated that entire season of my life to working out. I would get up in the morning, I'd go do road work, I'd come home, I'd have breakfast, I'd do some sparring, I'd do some bag work.
Raw eggs. Did you eat raw eggs?
What's that?
Raw eggs. Did you eat raw eggs?
I did not do the raw
You didn't
egg.
do the
I
Rocky
didn't do
thing?
the Rocky
Okay.
thing, no. I was always afraid of salmonella. Right? Either way, that's one goal that did not come to fruition because there were other fighters who saw it differently than I did. But it was not shortly after that I started weightlifting, and I like I said, I had natural punching power. I had natural strength. And as I remember this, in fourth grade, I could bench press 100 pounds.
Yeah.
And that's unusual.
Very
I mean,
unusual.
I don't know how many
You're not
listeners.
supposed to be lifting at fourth grade.
Right. Well, and I don't know how many
Again?
listeners understand fourth graders and 100 pounds, but that's very unusual.
Yeah.
And so I started weightlifting, and me and some buddies started weightlifting really serious. And in 1999, I entered my first weightlifting competition, and I became the state champion in the bench press. In my first competition, out of the bench.
What was that, by the way?
It wasn't that great. It was just over 400 pounds on the bench press. But it was a natural, drug tested, unequipped bench press competition.
Right.
And I found a new goal, a new purpose in life. And by 2002, my bench press had gone well over 500 pounds, and I became a world powerlifting champion. I had set that goal, and I had accomplished that goal. In fact, there was 5 of us that worked out in my basement together. And of the 5 of us, there was me, who was a world champion. There was 2 of us that became national champions, and I think another one that became a state champion. So we were very successful in the 5 of us that worked out together. And it became an obsession, and I accomplished it, and was repeated that 2 or 3 times as a world champion powerlifter.
And this is like in your 20s, 30s?
20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
20s and 30s.
You're getting medals. You're getting accolades. People are looking up to you. You are feeling like you're at the top of life right there.
Yeah, I mean your career, right? Like police officer, SWAT, and then your hobbies, your powerlifting champion. Like, and the thing is anybody knows. I mean, I've lifted. I don't look like I lifted, so you can say what you want about me. But the thing is I've lifted, and when you lift, your confidence goes through the roof, right?
Oh,
like,
that's true.
There is something about, especially when you're doing it with a competitive mindset of like going out to win something. So you're walking in this air of confidence.
Yeah.
And you say maybe a little bit more than just confidence.
Yeah. It was arrogance. I mean, I was a world champion powerlifter who was also a SWAT team commander, and so I was quite proud of myself. Let's just say that, and that led to a natural direction. I'd always been interested in politics. I think a lot of people are. And as a result of that, I did a weightlifting benefit for a family in our city. I was living in Harriman at the time, and I did a weightlifting benefit for some kids that were underprivileged, and it made the news, the local news. Anyway, one thing led to another, and I was recruited to run for the Utah House of Representatives.
Wow.
Police officer, world champion weightlifter, well liked in my community, very, very active in the LDS church. My wife and I grew up together, and I would like to say that I set a goal, in fourth grade when she moved into our LDS ward. When she was in second grade, I was in fourth grade, and I set a goal to marry her, and I did. But that's not true.
Oh, okay.
I have been best friends with her older brother our entire lives, and so we wanted to figure out ways that we could still hang out when we were older. And we kind of conjured up this idea that my little brother would marry his sister so that we could still have that connection. But it ended up I got to be lucky and I married his sister. But my wife and I grew up together. We were very active in the LDS church. I just checked all the marks to be someone who could run for office. I was conservative. I was Mormon. I was an elders quorum president. Very active, married in the church, married in the temple. Powerlifting champion, so I had some popularity there, and SWAT team commander, a police officer. Those things are all a good resume to run for office, and so I did.
Can I ask you about running for office? You had the resume, but was there something inside of you that was like, I can make a change, or was there something?
Oh yeah.
Or was it more of this is kind of a popularity contest? I want to have
A little
the
of both.
notoriety. Like, what was going on in your heart?
So it was a little of both. It was yet another. It was another feather in the cap. It was another thing that I could accomplish in my life that most people don't. That certainly was part of it. But there were things that I wanted to change. I was a big advocate of parents for choice in education, having options to send your kids to private schools or charter schools rather than public schools. That was something that was important to me. I worked as a sex crimes detective, and I wanted to change some of the laws. In fact, I don't say this at any amount of arrogance at all, but just about every sex crime law on the books in the state of Utah now was written by me. I rewrote every one of them when I was in the legislature, including the minimum mandatory laws for child rape and those types of things.
Wow.
So I wanted to change those laws. So there was a multiple motivations. But in 2006, I filed to run for the Utah House of Representatives, and I ended up winning. Yet another goal. And it was shortly after that at a political event where I said those famous words that I'm good at everything I do.
Oh, wow.
And the interesting thing, I'll never forget this. The interesting thing is that nobody was offended by me saying that, because I was in a room full of people who were good at just about everything they did.
Okay.
They felt the same about themselves.
They felt the same about themselves.
Wow.
They were very successful business people. They were successful politicians, and they understood my mindset. They understood what I was saying. And I look back on me saying that. I look back on that day and I cringe, but it was so normal in that environment. I quickly rose to popular, very, very popular as a politician. I rode this anti-Washington wave of the Tea Party movement started to rise heavily, and I became really the Tea Party leader in the state of Utah. I helped form this national organization called the Patrick Henry Caucus, which was focused on state sovereignty, states' rights, and it exploded faster than we ever thought it would. I mean, it grew so quickly, and it gained the attention of Glenn Beck, who at the time had a TV show on Fox News, and they called me and they asked me if I would be a guest on their show. And I'm like, sure, you bet. I will grace you with my presence. And so they sent a car to pick me up, and we went. And I was in Salt Lake, in a Salt Lake studio, and it was just over satellite. And I introduced the idea of the Patrick Henry Caucus to the world on the Glenn Beck TV show. It was so well received that they called me after the airing of that show, and they said Glenn would like to fly you to New York to be in studio with him. And so they did. They flew me on Fox News' dime to New York, and we filmed. I think it was 2. It may have been 3 episodes, but anyway, we filmed a couple different episodes in one sitting with Glenn Beck at the Fox News studios, and I will never forget this. When we returned to Salt Lake, we had a Patrick Henry Caucus rally at the state capitol, and there were other legislators that were involved in the formation of this group, but I took all the credit. I really took the attention for myself and was, I was well-spoken, and, I was just the face of it. And there were probably 8,000 people in the Capitol, maybe 10,000 people packed into the Capitol that day, day after I returned from the Glenn Beck show. Mm-hmm. It was filled. The stairs were packed. The rotunda was packed. And I could see that there was a microphone set up where we were going to talk. And I was on the House floor looking down through the slit in the door, and I could see the people. And I was fashionably late, and I wanted to make an entrance. And as people were taking their seats or whatever, I pushed these 2 big ornate wooden doors open, and I exited out of the House of Representatives, and the crowd went nuts. And it was like Caesar had entered the Coliseum.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, thank you, my people. And I go walking down the stairs, and the crowd parts like the Red Sea, and I go down, and I'm like...
It's like a movie.
It was unbelievable. That day, that moment was the height of my arrogance, because I loved it. I was recognized anywhere I'd go in Utah. I was recognized. I was recognized in restaurants. People knew who I was. You're Carl Wimmer, and it was fun. I mean, it was fun. People would buy my lunches, and I wouldn't even know who. And it was just, I became internally a self-possessed, self-obsessed, arrogant, entitled person. On the outside, I'd give the image of humility, but I knew that I was destined for greatness. So I thought.
Yeah.
The whole time, religiously, things are great. Still very active. I think I was Elders Quorum president for 3 years in my ward, and things are going good. Everything's going good in my life. I decided to run for United States Congress.
Right.
Because that's the natural step, right? I am the most popular Utah politician out there. I'm going to run for Congress, and I'm going to dominate, and we're going to go take back Washington. And so I run for Congress, and at the time I was breaking records for fundraising. I had all the major endorsements. I had Senator Mike Lee supporting me. We were having fundraiser in Washington, D.C., all the major political power.
How sure were you about winning this?
There was zero doubt.
Really?
No, there was no doubt. The polling was all in our favor. I was practically picking out drapes in Washington, D.C. My wife and I were looking at places to buy in Virginia, mm-hmm. Where we were going to live and raise our kids. We decided we'd live both places. So certain that I was going to win, because mm-hmm. I had every major endorsement from every major political organization. I was a fundraising machine. And
was this midterm, or was this the same as the presidential
2012
election?
Presidential election?
So who was running then?
Mitt Romney was the Republican nominee.
Okay.
And that played a role in what happened with my race.
Okay.
The last debate, I dominated the debates by all standards. But the last debate, we were asked a question, and that question was, if we were to vote for president today, who would we vote for? And I was too honest. And there was 5 Republicans running: myself, Steve Sandstrom, Mia Love, a couple other people who really weren't legitimate contenders at the time. And every one of them, they started down at the other end. They all said, Mitt Romney, Mitt Romney, Mitt Romney, Mitt Romney. They got to me and I said, Ron Paul. And
So you were being true to that Tea Party
yeah,
platform.
yeah. I felt that Mitt Romney was not pro-life enough for me, was not conservative enough for me. And I said, Ron Paul. I said, if I had to vote today, I'd vote for Ron Paul. This was about 2 weeks before convention, and within the next few days, Mitt Romney endorsed one of my opponents. And he was so famous and so popular in Utah at the time that it completely changed the dynamic of the race, and I lost.
Incredible.
I lost to Mia Love, who would go on to lose, but then the next cycle in 2014, she'd go on to win.
Yes.
And she'd win, and she'd be in office for a short period of time before she would lose again. When I lost a convention, it was the most surreal, most devastating, most horrific thing that had ever happened to in my life up to that point, because there's nothing I'm not good at.
Right.
Yeah.
I succeed at everything I do.
Did you know why in the moment? Did you know it was because you didn't
I
endorse Romney?
just thought people were wrong. I'm like, people got it wrong. How in the world could this? It was like I was living in a dream. When I woke up the next morning, I actually thought, did that really happen? And it was so surreal. I could not believe it. My advisors could not believe. Nobody could believe that I had lost. And so I had quit my job as a police officer, my full-time job as a police officer, to run for office. And so now I'm unemployed, and I have lost a race for Congress. And that was the beginning of a deep, dark spiral. There was a job that I was offered in Nevada, a political job I was offered in Nevada. It ended up not being the case. I signed a contract and everything. I probably could have filed a lawsuit, but at that point, I was just spiraling, and decided to go back to law enforcement. That was my original career. Decided to go back to law enforcement. Let's just go. Let's get out of the media spotlight.
Right.
That didn't work real well. But let's get out of the media spotlight and let's go back to law enforcement in a small town. So we did move. We moved to central Utah, and I started working as a police officer again. And that's 2012. And things are looking up. Family's okay. Got a job, working in my career. And
Faith at this point?
faith is solid.
Yeah.
Solid as could be.
Okay.
We integrated, as soon as we moved into the small town, we integrated into our LDS ward. We integrated quickly. I let them know that I'd been Elders Quorum president before, and I started getting groomed to be in the Elders Quorum presidency again.
Okay.
And it was at that point that my life was about to take the biggest dramatic shift and change any human could possibly go through. Having your worldview, having everything pulled out from underneath you. Like I said, my wife and I were married in the Bountiful Temple. We had our oldest daughter. We had baptized her into the LDS Church. My oldest son, we baptized him into the LDS Church. And so things were going fine. My faith was strong. Towards the end of 2012, I was asked to prepare a lesson to teach in the Elders Quorum. And it was during the preparation for that lesson that I for whatever reason, I started hearing and seeing and reading things that I had never heard before about the LDS Church. And I wasn't that concerned about it because my faith was strong. I mean, I was one of those ones who was, and I was so Mormon, a coffee table was against the word of wisdom, okay?
Okay.
I mean, you don't have a coffee table in your house. I mean, I was all in. My wife and I would attend the temple, and we would do sessions in the temple. We would do sealings in the temple. We were in, and it was a faith that I embraced completely. It's the thing that people need to understand is that it's not. I was not shaky in my faith. And matter of fact, it was my absolute assurance beyond a shadow of a doubt is a term we would use. With every fiber of my being is a term that I would use. I was the guy who would bear his testimony every fast and testimonies meeting to help shore up those who were doubting. And I was just a faithful LDS man. And it was because of that faith that when I started reading these things that I had never heard before about Joseph Smith and about the foundations of the church.
Where did you discover these things? Because obviously this is not in your LDS manual for prepping a talk.
No.
Where did you find these things?
I wish I could tell you.
You don't know?
I don't remember. What I do remember that was very specific to that journey was hearing about a conversation with LDS apologist, defender of the faith, B.H. Roberts. There was a conversation that took place between the first presidency in the early mid 1900s and B.H. Roberts about the Book of Mormon and the similarities between the Book of Mormon and a book called The View of the Hebrews. The book, The View of the Hebrews, was written by a man by the name of Ethan Smith, no relation to Joseph Smith. It was written before the Book of Mormon, and it has a lot of similarities.
Okay.
The first presidency asked B.H. Roberts, who was the leading scholar and defender of the faith at the time, to do a comparison and figure out what's going on there and get back with them. And what I found in 2012 was the correspondence. It's not like I discovered it. Anyone can see it, but I had never seen it before. A correspondence that B.H. Roberts had written to the presidency of the church that said, I'm quoting here, I may be off by a word or two, but I remember this very specifically. He said, if the LDS church leadership does not come up with solid answers for the similarities in the View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon, as well as the anachronisms inside of the Book of Mormon, it's going to destroy the faith of the youth of the church.
Wow.
So you read this
I read
as
that.
you're preparing for a talk?
To give a talk, to teach a lesson.
Okay.
And that blew my mind because B.H. Roberts was not sainted, but he was someone who was stalwart as a believer and a defender of the faith. And for him to say something like that, it's like, wow, that's fascinating. But I wasn't worried because I am a strong believer, the strongest believer I knew. I had a testimony like I knew the church was true. Without question, I knew the LDS church was true and that Joseph Smith was a prophet. And so I was not worried to look into what B.H. Roberts was talking about. So you hear this you see this news and you're like, you just kind of bear your testimony to yourself and go, I'm good. I'm good, but
Okay.
I was curious.
Right.
And so I'm like, I want to get a copy of this View of the Hebrews. And I wonder who would have a copy. I wonder where I could get one. And the only thing I could think of was I knew a pastor through politics, actually. He was friendly to me politically, had invited me to his church a time or two when he had really political speakers putting on events at his church. And it's Terry Long of Calvary Chapel.
Okay.
Calvary Chapel. Terry's a good guy. And he knew me politically, and I knew who he was. And I knew he had a bookstore at his church. So I emailed him and I said, hey, Terry, Carl Wimmer, you remember me. Do you happen to, by chance, have a copy of a book called The View of the Hebrews in your bookstore? And he wrote back immediately. He says, I sure do. It'll be in the mail tomorrow. Give me your address. It'll be in the mail tomorrow. Are there any other books you need? I'm like, no, that's good. Well, Terry being Terry, he sent that book along with a couple other books, and one of the books that he sent, it's a fantastic book. One of the books he sent is what it's titled The Insider View of Mormon Origins. And it's written by a man by the name of Grant Palmer, who's passed away now. Grant was the head of the LDS Institutes of Religion in California, a devout believer in the LDS Church. The institutes are like the high school. They have seminary.
Yeah.
Institutes are like seminary for college kids.
Right.
Okay. And he was the head of the institutes in California when he wrote this book. And I don't know. I never talked to him. I never met the man. I won't meet him until we meet again in the hereafter. But my understanding is he wrote the book from the perspective of wanting to be honest about church history, just to be open about the LDS church history. He thought that was important. Well, I thought, okay, I can read this book because this guy's a safe, he's a Mormon. He wrote it. He was the head of the LDS Institutes. And so I can start reading this book. And I started to read that book, and I immediately was repulsed by the things that the man was writing and saying. The things he was writing and saying about the foundations of the LDS Church, about the First Division, about Joseph Smith, about all of these different things, I immediately dismissed as demonic lies from hell, because I had never heard one of them growing up. I had never heard anything this man had said. And I remember late at night, I was up alone studying. It was maybe 1 o'clock. I was in the living room, and I remember throwing that book on the ground and actually saying out loud, "Grant Palmer, you're a damnable liar, and I am going to prove you wrong."
Okay.
Because it was offensive to me. And I had such a dark feeling. And as a LDS man, I relied heavily on my feelings.
Mm.
If something was uplifting and made me feel good and gave me chills and gave me this feeling, I equated that with truth and with God's truth and God revealing truth. And if something felt dark and evil and bad, I equated that with Satan and him. And so I was thinking, because there was such a darkness as I was reading this, I equated that with Satan. And it was such a weird feeling. I would later learn that it certainly probably was demonic forces trying to keep me from researching rather than, keep me from truth. But I pressed forward. I wanted to know what Grant Palmer had to say so I could prove him wrong. I wanted to be able to defend my faith. And for the next several weeks, I would go to bed. My wife and I go to bed. I'd wait till she was asleep. I'd nudge her, "You asleep?" Okay. And then I'd sneak out to the living room and I'd study this book. And I'd start studying the counters to the book. I finally reached out to Farms, who you had mentioned,
Yeah.
Fair LDS. And I sent them a letter saying, "I am a believer. I am Elders Quorum. I was former Elders Quorum president. I am a temple attending LDS man. I need help. I want to believe. I desperately want to believe in the faith that I was raised in, but I'm really questioning certain things. Help me here. How do you justify certain things? How do you answer certain things?" And they responded to me. They were gracious as could be. So just good guys.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, well, I'll tell you in a second. They responded, but devastatingly to my faith, their responses hurt more than helped, because their responses, along with the links to LDS doctrine and their links to the LDS website and their links to church history documents that you could go and study at BYU and on the LDS websites, only confirmed the most devastating things that I was reading. And we can get into that if you want, but it only confirmed and reaffirmed everything that I was reading that I had never, ever been taught, everything that I had been raised to believe, and things that I had never, ever heard before, they affirmed were true, historically true. And it bothered me so much that I got up and I spent time, I drove to BYU
Mm-hmm.
and spent time at the library at BYU, because I wanted to go to the LDS sources to be able to defend my faith. And the more I dug, the more I realized that the things that Grant Palmer was saying was 100% accurate. And he was only referring to the true history of the LDS Church, the truth of the first vision and the foundations of the LDS history. that was never, ever, ever taught as a young man growing up through Sunbeams and CTRs and Valiants and primary and young men's, never taught once. And it was devastating.
So this time of research was about how long? Couple months?
Not even that. I dove in and I researched hard, and that's kind of my personality, man. When I dive into something, I go full bore, and so I would say that took place, toward the end of 2012, leading into the beginning of 2013. So maybe a month, maybe 4 weeks of heavy, intense, maybe 6 weeks of heavy, intense research.
And during this time, you're not letting people at church know, definitely not letting your wife know.
No.
So what was that time period like?
3 weeks into this. 3 weeks into this research, I am a wrecked man. I could not believe that even those who were faithful members meant to defend the faith only caused more problems because they just reaffirmed all of this stuff that I had never heard before. And I had so many issues that ultimately I knew I could not believe the fundamental foundations of the LDS Church anymore.
Were you tempted, though, to put it on the shelf at this point?
The problem with that is, yes. The answer to that's yes.
Okay.
But the problem is, at this point, I had done so much research and had so much factual, historical truth confirmations affirmed to me that I would have had to intentionally ignore over 100 different discrepancies. And that's not exaggeration. I had a list, 100 different discrepancies for me to continue to believe. I couldn't. I could have pretended, but it was killing me. And 3 weeks into this, my wife finally put her foot down because I was a miserable wretch. I was a horrible human being. And she had no idea what was going on. And she confronted me. And she says, one evening, kids go to bed, and she's like, come here. What is going on with you? There is something wrong with you. You are not anything like the man I know. What is going on? And I'm like, okay, you really want to know? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, here it comes. This is the end of my marriage.
Really?
Yeah. I'm like, this is it. I'm about to unload on this woman, and I don't even care.
Do you think she suspected that you were having an affair or something?
That's an interesting question, and I've never asked her that. And it would be interesting. I'm going to actually ask her that question. She knew something was wrong.
Right.
Right? I don't think...
You'd obviously been treating people differently.
Yeah.
Because you were
wrecked. Oh, I was
emotionally
short-tempered, angry, just bitter, mad. And I don't know what she thought, but she wasn't having it anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, woman, sit down, because here it comes. And for the next couple hours, I unloaded a month's worth of research. And I mean a month's worth. There was not a day or a minute that would go by where I didn't have downtime, where I was not researching, where I was not talking to Mormon apologists, where I was not doing things to discover, to defend my faith. It was all based on wanting to believe. Oh, I wanted to believe. But ultimately, I vomited all this stuff onto her. And
how did that go?
Amazingly good.
Really?
Praise God. She sat there and she listened. And my wife is not a wilting daisy. I mean, she is an alpha woman.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was expecting a fight. And ultimately she said, she told me, she said, well, what do you think we need to do? I said, well, I'm out. I said, I'll go to church for the kids' sake, but I'm out. And she said, well, I need to do some research. I'm like, do what you need to do.
But how do you guys affirm that you guys were good as a couple at that point?
I don't think we really even know. I mean, not really.
Okay.
But here's the amazing thing, and this is what my wife will tell you. God had brought her to a place where she did not enjoy going to church. She didn't dare tell me that because I was the Mormon man who was a tyrant. I mean, early on in our marriage, she brought home red wine vinegar from the store. And
Oh my goodness.
I flipped my lid.
Really?
Oh yeah, which is so stupid. It's not against the word of wisdom, even to a Mormon, but to me it was because it was the appearance of evil.
Yeah.
Red wine, vinegar, and I was not having it, and it caused a massive blow up in our house, and she threw it out the back door. All right, and shattered it on the sidewalk in our back.
So you were an LDS legalist.
Oh, to the T.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Of course, for her, but in my own walk, I was such a hypocrite because I was a prideful, arrogant, pompous man who indulged in online pornography, who had a foul mouth when I wasn't at home or wasn't at church. I was the picture perfect guy at church. Outside of that, I was legalist for others, but I gave myself whatever I wanted to do.
It's interesting that you were so into the appearance side of things.
Oh, huge.
Because
It was
the
all
whole
about-
red wine vinegar thing is about the appearance of
That's
evil.
right.
But as long as you can keep things under wraps and secret, you were able to indulge
Kind of, sort of, for me.
for you.
I could indulge, but my wife wasn't. No, my wife needed to be. She needed to be like Molly Mormon. She needed to be that person.
So she didn't want to tell you that she was no longer enjoying
She
things.
was not enjoying church at all. She didn't enjoy the hymn. She did not enjoy going. She was in the primary presidency already in our ward. And so she was promoted immediately. She got a calling immediately. She was put into the primary presidency. And ironically, the theme that year was the Book of Abraham. And anyone who is struggling with their faith knows exactly, like when I say the Book of Abraham, they're like, oh, because there were so many things, but that was the single biggest straw that broke the camel's back for our faith, for my faith, was the issues with the Book of Abraham. And so ultimately, it went a lot better than I thought. There was no divorce papers like I thought there was going to be. There wasn't a huge fight like I thought there was going to be. There was just me shell-shocking my wife and her needing to do some research on her own. And over the next couple weeks, she would do some research, but she would kind of keep her faith somewhat. She was a much slower, less emotional person than I am. But by the end of January of 2013, had somebody asked me where I stood with faith, if I was an honest man, I would tell them I was an atheist. I had lost all faith that there was a God. And if there was a God, I hated him and I was angry.
So you're walking through this season of just tremendous darkness for you.
Yeah.
Because you had all this assurance, all this confidence in your faith, in who you were, and then all of a sudden you go from, losing the Congress seat to moving to starting over, and now your faith is decimated.
Yeah. Yeah, I was Carl Wimmer. I was the one who was recognized in restaurants. I was Carl Wimmer, world champion powerlifter, SWAT team leader.
Oh, I forgot to mention breaking your spine.
I fractured my spine.
Yeah.
I lost that, but the thing about powerlifters is we're kind of fat, right? We're very powerful, but we're a little bit heavy. If you're not doing the steroids, you have to eat a lot, and so here I am, a broken man who's overweight, but not near as strong as I used to be, unemployed, now working again, and lost my faith, lost my run for Congress. My life was, in my eyes, as low as it could not have gone lower. I was face down on the ground begging God to show me truth. I remember this. And the irony of it didn't hit me until after I come to know who Jesus was. But I was on the ground, face down, puddles of tears, begging God to put the genie back in the bottle, to just reveal that the Mormon church was true. Give me my faith back, begging God to reveal truth to me. And all he was doing was showing me why I could no longer believe the tenets of the LDS church. And the irony of that did not hit me until I came to know who Jesus was.
Well, we want to kind of pause right here because we want to invite you guys back. We're going to do another episode with Carl and really focusing on meeting Jesus and for the first time in a real sense in the way you describe it, meeting Jesus for the first time and understanding his grace. And so we're going to leave you here and we thank you for listening to the podcast. Next episode, we're going to talk about Carl meeting the one true Jesus.
Okay.
All
That
right,
sounds
Dave.
great.
All right, we're out. We'll see you
Thanks,
next
guys.
time.
Thanks.